Let's pray one more time. Heavenly Father, we come before you today and we thank you. Thank you for the privilege of being together and reading in public. We thank you for the privilege of reading from your word. We thank you, Father, that those of us that know you, you have blessed us infinitely more than we could ever ask for or imagine, that we get to be sons and daughters of God. And so we thank you for that. And we ask for your help now, Father, that we admit without reservation that we are needy people, that we need you. We need you to be working in our hearts. We need you to change our attitudes and our minds and our desires. And ultimately, Father, we need your work so that we can become more like Jesus, and we will love the way he loves, and we will act the way he acts. And so we ask for your help with that you would work in us now, that we would become more like your Son. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So I think I gave this analogy a couple weeks ago. And it was someone that a pastor friend of mine had told me about. And he said he was in Africa. Or the story was this missionary's in Africa, and he comes across these group of kids, and they're playing marbles. And he thinks, "Oh, that's very nice." And then he looks closer and said, "Well, they're not marbles; they're rocks." And it's because they couldn't afford the nice glass marbles. And then he looks even closer, and they're not marbles, and they're not rocks; they're raw diamonds. That in this particular part of Africa, what do? I mean, you go to the nearest stream and you pick up some pretty rocks, and apparently some of them were diamonds. And so he thought it was my pastor friend, his name's Tom, he said, being a pastor is like playing marbles with diamonds. And so we come to another diamond passage, and to the very best of our ability, we treat it like a diamond, but it often ends up not being anywhere near as precious as it deserves. And so we're going to come together today. We're going to be reading and studying through these next 4 verses. It's one of the blessings and sort of the neat things about preparing for a sermon is that I end up spending a lot more time looking at a really small passage than I naturally would. And so I've been sort of looking at this now for several weeks, and I'm excited to share it with you. Matthew 6, 1 through 24. So we're finally in Matthew 6. We've been in Matthew 5 for a really long time. I'm sure it tested the patience of some of you. So we're finally in Matthew 6. You get to turn the page. And that whole 24-verse chunk could really be preached as a single sermon. It would be a really long sermon, so we're not going to do that today. But we could do that. In Matthew 6, 1, Jesus introduces the theme. He says, "Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them. For then you will have no reward from your Father who's in heaven." And then if you drop down a few verses, down to Matthew 19 through 21, he kind of drives the point home. He says, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where the moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasure in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And then he talks a little bit more, and then he sums it all up in Matthew 6:24. "No one can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money." So this whole passage is really a big chunk. And in the middle of verses 1 and verse 24, Jesus is addressing 3 specific spiritual disciplines. And as it turns out, these spiritual disciplines matched up with what were called pillars of piety, which is a fancy word, but it essentially means things that you're expected to do within Judaism. And so giving to the needy is in verses 2, 3, and 4. Then we have prayer in 5 through 15, and then fasting in 16, 17, and 18. All right, and so as we're getting ready to sort of launch into verses 1 through 4, though, there are a couple things we need to sort of talk about up front, because it kind of helps us lay the groundwork for what we're going to talk about and make sure we're understanding it in the right way. Number 1, first general principle is that righteousness on the inside should be demonstrated on the outside. So we want to keep that in mind. To put it another way, the absence of righteousness on the outside that brings into question the authenticity of what happened on the inside. I like to talk about babies when I think about this. That if you have a baby and the baby's not eating, that's a problem. If the baby's not eating, it doesn't mean the baby's dead, but it means the baby's really unhealthy and it needs to be helped to eat. And so that's why we have fancy places called hospitals, and we do something called a NICU. And you sort of nurse the babies through that. But one of the possibilities, if the baby's not eating, it's possible that the baby wasn't actually born alive. And so we know that a baby is doing well when a baby squeals, and a baby cries, and a baby eats, because that's what babies do. And so in the same way, we know that Christians are alive and healthy and well when they do what Christians are doing, what they're supposed to do. So the stuff on the inside should always be demonstrated on the outside. If you want to have some time, you could look up some passages in James 1, 22 through 25, and then James 2, 14 and 17, which kind of say the same thing. Second thought, and this one's a new one for me, it's not automatically wrong if someone sees you doing something good. So this next 24 verses are emphasizing the importance of secrecy. And so we're going to be talking a lot about secrecy. And yet, if you look at sort of the broader context, I'll repeat it again, it's not automatically wrong if I see Curtis giving somebody something to the needy, for example. And the reason I can say that is some of these verses. So you have John 13:35, where Jesus tells his disciples, "By this all people will know you are my disciples if you love one another." So that sort of assumes something about what it means to be a Christian, is that we will be loving one another, and people will be able to see that we are loving one another. And that's good. Or Matthew 5, 10 through 12, that's just a few verses before what we're doing today. "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Well, that assumes something else. That assumes somebody else saw us being righteous and they didn't like it, so they persecuted you. All right? Because he just says that we're blessed in that case. Or this one in Matthew 5, 14 through 16, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp, put it under a basket, put it on a stand, and it gives light to all the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." So the emphasis on verses 1 through 24, Jesus, we're going to see again, over and over again, do this in secret. The emphasis is less on the secrecy bit, though we don't want to de-emphasize that, and more on what's going on inside of our hearts. That there's something deeper at play than just don't let people see you doing good things. It's that who are you trying to impress? Are you trying to make yourself good? Are you trying to make God look good? Do I want people to say, "Wow, Daniel, he is so incredibly generous, and he prays, and his prayers last forever. It's amazing. And then he fasts like 5 times. You can tell because he gets hangry when he's fasting. And we know he's fasting, and he sort of looks awful, and wow, what a spiritual guy." That's not good. That would be wrong. And it's clearly wrong, because if that was all of the things that you knew about me, then I'm trying to impress you, and I'm not trying to impress God. And so as a general rule, this came from a guy named Kevin DeYoung, who I heartily recommend to you. He's put it this way. He said, "If you should hide if you are tempted to show, and show if you are tempted to hide." So if I'm thinking, you know what, I just gave some money to Hope Haitian Choir, and I'm so glad in that, I know I'll put it on Facebook. That's not right. Okay? But if I'm a Christian, and I'm tempted to hide and say, so-and-so might not like me if they know I'm a Christian, that's when we should show. Does that make sense? So we should show if we are tempted to hide, and hide if we are tempted to show. So keep that in mind. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. So today's sermon, though, is giving to the needy. And one of the things that may surprise you, it surprised me when I first heard this, is Jesus talked a lot about money. In fact, he talked more about money than he did about heaven or hell. And so this was a big topic for him. And so over the next few minutes, I wanted to share 3 thoughts with you as we work through this passage together. Number 1 is that giving to the needy is expected. Number 2 is that giving to the needy should be done without great fanfare. And number 3 is that giving to the needy leads to getting from God. And we'll describe that more in a second. Okay, so those are the 3 thoughts. We'll repeat them again in a bit. But number 1, giving to the needy is expected. And we see that in Matthew 2, because then it says, when you give to the needy, not if. All right, so this is something that was expected. It's expected in Judaism. It's expected in Christianity. And this is where a little bit of pause helps. If I sort of look at my own life, I think I underemphasize the importance of giving to the needy. I know I do. And that's a problem because God has an incredibly special place in his heart for needy people. And we know this from hundreds of verses. The Old Testament is filled with many examples of God intervening on the behalf of the poor, or those that are widowed, or those that are orphaned. He's lifting up the poor and the oppressed. There are also lots of examples of God tearing down those that are rich and that were oppressed and doing the oppressing. That the way they got rich, it's not that being rich in and of itself is a sin, but these particular individuals that got rich by being mean to other people. And so there are examples of God tearing them down from their position. And that kind of makes sense within our sort of framework of understanding social justice and what's right and what's wrong. These next two short thoughts, though, surprised me. God identifies so closely to the needy that doing good to someone who is needy is counted as doing good to God. That surprised me. And vice versa. Doing something wrong to somebody who is needy or ignoring someone who is needy is the same or counted as ignoring or doing something wrong against God. Here's some verses to sort of back up that thought. So Proverbs 14:31, he who oppresses the poor shows contempt for their maker. That's just laying it out there. Proverbs 19:17, he who is kind to the poor lends to the Lord. So that's good. And then in probably 5 or 10 years, when we finally get to Matthew 25, when Jesus really ups the stakes. This is a big chunk of passages I wanted to read, but this is good. So if you have a chance, you can turn to it, but you don't have to. Matthew 25, verse 31. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit in his glorious throne. So Jesus is talking about what it will be like when Jesus comes back. He comes back for the second time. Okay? Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he'll place the sheep on his right, but the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those on the right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. And then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison or visit you? And the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these of my brothers, you did it to me. Then he will say to those on the left, depart from me, you who are accursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me. And then he will say to those on the left, depart from me, you who are accursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you did give me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and did not invite me in. They will answer, a little farther down, they will answer the Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick in prison and did not help you? He will reply, truly I say to you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. And then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. So there's a lot in there. But you can see that general principle sort of as it weaves its way through the entire Old Testament, and it weaves itself here in the book of Matthew. That when we do good to someone who is needy, God credits that to us as a good deed. It's the same as doing something good to God, and the vice versa is true as well. But there's even more than that. We see also in the Bible that caring for the needy is such an integral part of God's character that it is impossible to worship God and be heartless towards the needy at the same time. It's one or the other. Listen to Isaiah 58. This is 3 through 7. This is Israel speaking, and Israel is complaining. And they're complaining because they're doing all the right stuff and they don't think God is listening. All right, here's what their complaint is. It says, "Why have we fasted and you have not seen it? Why have we humbled ourselves and you take no knowledge of it?" And here's God's response. It says, "Behold, in the day of your fast you seek your own pleasure and oppress all your workers. Behold, you fast only to quarrel and fight and to hit with a wicked fist. Fasting like yours this day will not make your voice be heard on high. Is this not the fast that I choose?" Here's the part I want to hear. "To loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke. Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and bring the homeless poor into your house, who, when you see naked, to cover him, and not hide yourself with your own flesh?" And a couple other short verses. Jeremiah 22:16. "He," referring to one of the kings of Judah, "judged the cause of the poor and needy, and then it was well. Is not this to know me, declares God." Did you catch that? He judged the poor well. He judged the needy well. He brought good news, and he was told by God that he was doing well. And then 1 John 3:17, "If anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him?" So we see all these scriptural principles. We see right up front that God cares for the needy. He lifts up the poor and the oppressed. We see that when he judges those that have been doing the oppressing, and he tears those individuals down. And then whenever good is done to someone who is needy, God credits that as good done to God, and vice versa. And here we see that caring for the needy is such closely to the heart of God that we cannot follow God and be heartless toward the needy at the same time. Because if we're like that, then God's love and God's heart's not in us. All right? So that there are some incredibly big things at stake here. Now, that raises a lot of hard questions. And if we were to do an entire conference on this topic, we would answer or try to answer all of these. But I wanted to share some of them with you, and then you can think about them later. But there are lots of hard questions when you come from this passage. You say, who are the strangers, for example, that we're supposed to be kind to in Matthew 25? Seems like it might be a good idea if we're good to them. Who are the needy in our community? And if we don't know any, how are we going to find them? How do we help people without hurting them? It seems like somebody wrote a book on that, right, Roger? So When Helping Hurts, okay? It's a good book. And it's a long book. It's not something you just power your way through at morning breakfast time. There's a lot that needs to be said there. What implications should this principle about being kind to the needy have on our spending patterns? So Terry and I have been looking at our spending patterns. Our credit card got a little bigger than would have been nice. And it's like, ooh, it's time to reassess. And so we were doing an audit on ourselves and looking at our credit card and sort of breaking it into categories. And it's like, well, we could have cut back here, and this one's because my boys eat a lot, and this one's because of the car. And those are bad. We can live with those, but maybe we should cut back in these locations. So what implications does this have on our spending patterns or on our lifestyle? And perhaps it's a theme of the week, but we need to say it. What implications does this have on our politics? Right? Like immigration policy. There's no easy answer, but surely it has some kind of implication somewhere in there. And whatever we come up with those answers, there's at least one thing that is true. We are not following Jesus well if we're not thinking through these issues, at least on a personal level. We're not following Jesus well if we're not turning those answers into actions. And we're not following Jesus well if we are not chiefly characterized by Christ-like mercy and kindness and graciousness and forgiveness. If somebody looks at me and says, wow, Daniel, he is a real stickler for the rules. I'm so impressed. That is not good. I would much rather have them say, wow, Daniel's gracious and he's kind. And when people blow it, he forgives them. because that's what Christ is like. In addition to being righteous and doing what is right. Does that make sense? So we dare not be chiefly characterized by anything else other than Christ-like mercy and kindness, graciousness and forgiveness. So that's thought number one, that giving to the needy is expected as part of what it means to be a Christian. Thought number two, though, is that giving to the needy should be done without great fanfare. We see that in Matthew 2, 3, and 4. It says, thus, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogue and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Truly, I say to you that they've received their reward. When you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Apparently, the Pharisees and the religious leaders were making a big deal of their giving. We don't know if they were literally using trumpets. It's possible Jesus was using some hyperbole here, but you kind of get the picture, right? So you got the Pharisee, and he's the extra super holy person, and he's got the cash because they get cash. And then you said, all right, it's time for me to give. I know I'm going to be a really good example to everyone, and I want them to think I'm really good because I am. And I'm going to blow the trumpet so everyone will look up from what they're doing, and there's the Pharisee. There's whoever. And they're about to give. Oh, look, they put 3 coins into the giving basket instead of 1. They must be so generous. And so they were making this big parade about giving. It reminded me of Disney's Aladdin. Remember? So you have poor Aladdin, and he finds the genie. And Aladdin wants to impress the princess. So he goes to the genie, and the genie makes him Prince Ali. Do you remember this? Okay, this is one of the fun songs. All right, and as they're sort of having this massive procession in through the town on their way up to the palace, and the genie is singing this song about how wonderful Prince Ali is. Here's some of the lyrics. He says he's got 95 white Persian monkeys, and to view them he charges no fee. He's got slaves, he's got servants, and flunkies. I don't know what a flunky is. I should have looked that up. But he has them. They bow to his whim, love serving him. They're just lousy with loyalty to Ali, Prince Ali. Prince Ali, a more amorous he, Ali Ababa, heard your princess was a sight lovely to see, and that good people is why he got dolled up and dropped by with 60 elephants, llamas galore, with his bears and lions, a brass band and more, with his 40 fakirs, his cook, his bakers, his birds that warble on key, make way for Prince Ali. Wow. Okay. And then the kicker in that story, though, is he's not a prince, all right? And he tries to be a prince, and he can't live up to the expectations, which then leads on to the rest of the story, where now he has to get back in the good graces of the princess because she found out he's not a prince. All right? And that is what giving can look like. Giving with great fanfare can look like, and Jesus says we shouldn't do that. Jesus calls people that do that are hypocrites. I think we need to sort of define that a little bit. It's not being a hypocrite to do something when you don't feel like doing it. So ideally, we should all be cheerful givers. But if we said, you know what, I see that person over there, they need something, I don't want to, I'd rather keep my $20 bill in my pocket, but I'm going to help them. That's not me being a hypocrite, that's me being mature. Right? Being a hypocrite is when we want people to see we're something when we're not something. Right? And that's what Jesus is condemning. And one of the things you will notice as we go through the book of Matthew is that Jesus reserves some of his harshest criticism for religious hypocrites. He refers to the religious hypocrites as blind guides, whitewashed tombs, and a brood of vipers. I don't know what a brood is. Tyler maybe could tell us, but it sounds bad. Okay, we don't want to be broods of vipers. And Jesus had to be harsh because the very truth of the gospel is at stake here. And it was at stake then too. That if I make much of myself, it makes me look good and God look marginal. By making a lot of myself, I can give the impression that God only loves and really cherishes the really smart, the good-looking, the educated, the attractive, the hardworking, and the got-your-act-together people. And then even worse yet, it can imply that for someone to come to Jesus, they have to get righteous first instead of come to Jesus in order to get righteous. And that's not the gospel. The Bible's so clear. We all know this. That the Bible says that we are all dead. That there's nothing good and desirable that's inherently good about us, but yet God was kind. And he looked at you and he looked at me and he said, I want to spend eternity with that person. And I'm going to take care of all their poverty and their dirtiness, and I'm going to clean them up. And then they're going to be able to live with me forever. That's what the Bible says. Christ, despite our dirtiness and our sinfulness, he wants you and he wants me. You don't have to be something special in advance. You don't have to be something special first. And this is a thought that comes from one of the Jesus Storybook Bible, which we have on the back. One of my favorite lines in that book is, the only thing you need is nothing. Isn't that great? So we can't come to God and say, look at all my stuff, I'm so great. You can't do that, but you can come with nothing. We come to God with nothing, knowing that he can give us everything we need in order to enter into God's kingdom and be part of his family forever. That's what we need to exude to ourselves and to the people around us. So giving to the needy should be done without great fanfare, because giving to the needy with great fanfare puts the gospel in peril. And then lastly, giving to the needy leads to getting from God. And this is probably a little bit of a controversial thought. It was to me when I first learned it 10 years ago. When I was growing up, argument was that giving was its most selfless form if I gave without getting anything in return. Which makes sense, right? At least on a sort of philosophical level. When you look at the Bible actually has a more nuanced view of that. It is wrong to do something to be praised by somebody else. We just saw that. So that would be wrong. So if I gave money to Jason and then I publicized it, I'm really glorifying myself, not being gracious. All right, so we know that. And it's wrong in order to do something in order to get extra style points from God. So it's like, you know what, God, I'm going to try and rely on your grace, and I'd like to earn my way into heaven at the same time. You can just sort of make up for the bit I didn't quite do. All right, so that's wrong too. We know that. It is not wrong to do something because God promises to reward us if we do it. And that is full of implications. We'll talk more about that in a couple of weeks. But it's important, and it's throughout the Bible. We see that in verse 4. Getting from God is actually used as an incentive for giving secretly. Jesus is trying to spur us on to give secretly by appealing to our desire for greater gain. Isn't that odd? That the one we do something for is the one who rewards us, and it's a lot better to do something for Jesus and be rewarded by him because he's infinitely more gracious and generous and giving than any fellow human being we come across. As I said, we'll talk more about that in a few weeks, the next couple of times that I preach. But for today, it does again beg the question, what is the reward? And there are lots of different thoughts about that. We just finished the Beatitudes a few weeks ago, so surely we can get some clue from there that blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. So that's probably part of the reward. When I think of rewards from God, I always think about Matthew 25:23, where he says, well done, good and faithful servant. And that's what we want, those of us that are Christians, we want God to look at us when we've died and we go before him. I want him to tell me, well done, Daniel, you did a good job. Yeah, you did sin a lot, you were right. But overall, by Christ's life living within you, you did well. And we want that. We see throughout the Old New Testament as well that the Bible often encourages us to persevere by promising crowns of life. You can see that in James 1:12 and 1 Peter 5:4, then in the book of Revelations. And one of the neat things about that, if you sort of study the book of Revelations in Revelation 4, it's God in the center of his throne. He's surrounded by 24 elders, and they all have crowns. And then they pick the crowns off their head, and they cast them at Jesus' feet. And I love the picture of that, because it's recognizing that the reason I get a crown of life is because of Jesus, not because I really had my stuff together and I really did a good job. It's because of Jesus, right? So I think that might be what the reward is referring to. My favorite answer when thinking about the reward, though, is Matthew 13:44. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in the field, which a man found and covered up. And then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. The reward for giving secretly is that we get more of God, because that's the ultimate treasure. Every other treasure is less than that. We somehow, in some way, as we are giving secretly, so that we will be rewarded by God, we are blessed in a unique and precious way. And the best thing he can give us is he reveals himself to us more. He's gracious to us. We love him more. We get more of God by doing these things. It's the ultimate treasure. And so Matthew 6:1 is a good place to sort of wrap up. It says, beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. So giving to the needy is expected. Giving to the needy should be done without great fanfare. And giving to the needy leads to getting from God. Specifically, Jesus. We get more of him. When we pray. And so our Heavenly Father, we come to you, I come to you, and want to be quick to confess that it's really nice to be praised by other people. And we want that. And it's nice to be complimented, and it's nice to have people think we're doing a good job. And somewhere within there, there's something good about encouraging one another. But, Father, I would ask that you would work in my heart and in all of our hearts, that we would crave your pleasure more than we would crave the pleasure from other people. And that we would do so in a way that honors you and lifts you up, and it doesn't honor ourselves and make us look better than we are. Again, Father, as I prayed earlier, we are a needy people. And you were gracious to us. You came to us when we had nothing, when we were dead in all of our rebellion and sin, when we had nothing we could do to pay you back for the offense we had caused. And you died for us and paid the penalty for us. Thank you for being good to the needy. We are grateful. In Jesus' name, amen.